President Bashar al-Assad has criticized the presence of foreign troops in Syria without the permission of the Damascus government.
Any foreign troops coming to Syria without our invitation or consultation or permission, they are invaders, whether they are American, Turkish, or any other one. No, we don't. And we don't think this is going to help. Well, what are they going to do? To fight ISIS? The Americans lost nearly everywhere. They lost in Iraq. They had to withdraw at the end. Even in Somalia, let alone Viet Nam in the past, and Afghanistan, your neighboring country. Right. They didn't succeed anywhere they send troops. They only create mess.
Assad made the remarks in an interview with Chinese media. He said that the U.S. troops are good at destruction and creating problems and are, quote, very bad in finding solutions. Recently, Washington has broadened its military intervention in Syria by deploying Marines along with an artillery battery near the Daesh-held city of Raqqa. The Syrian president stressed the conflict in Syria can be resolved only through dialogue and the fight against terrorists. He believes that more delay in the peace negotiations will only do more harm and cause destruction within Syria. Assad also noted that the government forces have made fresh gains against the terrorists and are now very close to Raqqa. He added that liberating the Daesh-held city is a top priority for the government. Tony Gosling is an investigative journalist who joins us from Auckland. Tony Gosling, do you agree with the Syrian president about the U.S. troops in Syria, first of all being invaders and causing nothing but problems?
Well, yes, certainly they are invaders. I think what's going on right now is it actually begun in 1967 in the Six-Day War. Is the slow carve-up. Obviously, it's accelerated since the so-called Syrian civil war, even though it's actually really not a civil war, because most of the fighters were actually brought in, imported from abroad. It's a regime change, Mark II. And the trouble with all of this, of course, is that it's now putting the US on a collision course with Russia, not just with the President Assad in Syria. One thing I would disagree with about President Assad is, though, that he's talking about the US has failed in Iraq, in Afghanistan, Somalia, etc. Actually, it depends what you think the original mission was. There is this expression called a lose scenario. I think Viet Nam was a lose scenario, where the United States sends troops in, actually not even really intending to win, but just to destroy and disrupt the country. And of course, the special forces that I spoke personally to British special forces, which were in Syria right at the very beginning of the civil war, training some of these what are now ISIS fighters, the so-called rebels. These special forces are completely unaccountable. They're not overseen by Parliament here in the UK or Congress in the United States, and they are in many of the countries, and in fact maybe even now in countries where the regime change is planned for the future. The agenda here, I think, is actually led by Israel. And isn't it strange that the Israeli President Netanyahu, sorry, Prime Minister Netanyahu, he himself was a special forces soldier. He was an officer in the Sayeret Matkal. He was running covert operations, deniable black ops, the Israeli Prime Minister. So I think that actually is what's going on here. The US is just doing Israel's job, continuing to do so in Syria.
Thank you, Tony Gosling, investigative journalist from Auckland.